Welcome everyone to this webinar in our Liturgy Forecast for Catholic Schools series. My name is Matt Reichert. I direct the Center for Learning, a division of OCP, and I'm so glad that you were able to join us today. Thank you for taking time out of your busy day, whatever it is you had going on today. I know that you're fitting us in for this important conversation, so thanks for doing so. I'm excited to welcome back friend and colleague, Dr. Holly Smith-Brooks. Everyone, Holly, everyone.
Hello.
Holly from the Archdiocese of Louisville, but joining us remote from the Archdiocese of St. Louis this week. You're at Seek.
I am at Seek with
For those
24,500
who are
people.
joining who don't know what Seek is, what is Seek?
It is geez, I don't really know how to describe it. It's sponsored by Focus, which is an organization creating disciples and what do they do? College campuses around the country. It's like the NCYC for young adults is usually what I say.
Yeah, that's probably a pretty apt description, actually.
Yeah, but they also offer a Making Missionary Disciples track for parish lay ministers or employees or young adults, so beyond college students, and teaching the resources to evangelize, like how are we spreading the gospel and creating disciples to help build the church and serve the mission of Jesus. So
yeah, well, thanks for not only being there and attending to your own professional development, but taking a pause out of your professional development to help us with ours. So thank you for being here, Holly. Those of you who are joining us live, again, I put into the chat the link that you can go to find the resource packet for today's conversation. I'm going to share my screen really briefly because what I want to do to kick things off today is I want to orient you to this resource packet for today's conversation so you have a sense of what's here, what we made available to you. You don't need to follow the resource packet if you're joining from your phone or you have other stuff up on your screen. Don't worry about accessing the packet now. I just want to orient you to what's there so you know what you can go back to. I also want to mention some of the things that Holly and I will make sure to hit on in today's conversation. Please know at any point in time in this conversation, you can add your question into the Q&A link that you can find at the bottom of your screen. We'll do our best to get to your question. If you're watching this video after the fact, I know many of you are busy in your first couple of days back, and so you'll be watching the recording. Or if you're like me and you think of your question after the webinar ended, please feel free to reach out by email, learning@ocp.org, and we'll do our best to get you a satisfactory answer to your question. So looking at the packet, I want to point out a couple of things. Right here on page 2, our preparation considerations. I'm going to use this a little bit like an outline for Holly and I to talk through some of the suggestions we might have for you as you're thinking about your school liturgies during this time. Now, we're talking about Q3, so we're talking about basically now through the end of March. That includes, or most of the time includes, Lent. So we'll talk probably mostly about Lent during this conversation, but we don't want to overlook the fact that a lot of stuff is happening during this quarter. We have these last days of the Christmas season. We have 6 weeks of ordinary time. We have a couple of feasts in there. We've got Catholic Schools Week before we get to February 14th and the start of Lent. So we're going to talk a lot about Lent, but we want to just talk about Lent, especially if you have questions about other times. So know that page 2, our preparation considerations, we'll use that a little bit as an outline. Know that, as I mentioned, we got a lot going on in this quarter. I have a liturgical calendar or a seasonal calendar included here for the quarter. You can see here we are on the 4th. Happy Memorial of Elizabeth Ann Seton to all of you celebrating. You can see we transition next week into ordinary time before Ash Wednesday on February 14th. So, and we end the quarter with Holy Week. So we'll talk a lot about considerations for these weeks from the end of January, or excuse me, beginning of January all the way through to the end of March. Also in the packet, we have a variety of other resources that you can use how you see fit if they're useful to you. So a colleague and composer Ron Harbour has this great article about intentional preparation, spiritual preparation for Lent. This is a great article to use just for your own particular prayer, but maybe as a way to use this with your staff or your faculty before you get to Lent, to be able to attune to their needs. You're worried about your students' observance of Lent. You're worried about all the other plans when it comes to Lent. Sometimes we are the ones whose preparation or spiritual formation suffers. So there's an article here for you, along with some reflection questions to use on your own or with your staff. We have a seasonal bulletin that we'll talk through with some reminders, some considerations, some don't forgets for ordinary time, but especially for the season of Lent. What do you need to remember for your masses during the week during this season? We also have a planner that hopefully can be helpful with some checklists for you as you or your staff. You can give this to other teachers in your building, are planning school masses any time of the year. We also have some recommendations and reminders for planning school prayer services, along with a sample planner for school prayer services, along with a script you can just print out and slap in whatever music you want to use, make whatever text change you want to use here. If it's useful to you, use it, change it, edit it however you want to see fit. We also have some information in here when it comes to penance services and the sacrament of penance and reconciliation. Especially during Lent, oftentimes schools will offer this opportunity for the sacraments to their students who have already received the sacrament of initiation. So we have some information here about sacrament of penance with some outlines. Later, we have an article about music for sacrament of penance. We have some common questions that come up during Lent. Who can distribute ashes, right? Do we empty holy water fonts during Lent or not? What do we do if we're changing the confiteor? How many times do we strike our breast during the confiteor? All kinds of these questions that we typically get. We have a liturgical evaluation survey, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And then again, a whole bunch of suggestions for music during the season of Lent. What could you use for gathering, for preparation, for communion, for sending, for either a mass or a prayer service. So you can check that out. And as I mentioned, music for the rite of penance as well. So there's a lot of materials that are here. So download the resource packet, share it with your staff, share it with other colleagues, change what you want to change. It's there for your own particular benefit. Okay, that's an awful lot. Holly, let's talk a little bit about your experience and some of the things that you've seen. And maybe before we really get into Lent, let's start with Catholic Schools Week. So again, as I mentioned, we're in these last few days of the Christmas season. We return to ordinary time next week. At the end of this month, we'll be celebrating Catholic Schools Week. Oftentimes, it's an opportunity where we pull out the stops a little bit for our school masses. My kids' school, it's also Parents' Day, Grandparents' Day. Also, we have the habit in our parish schools of our school children provide leadership of music ministry at that Sunday preceding Mass for the parish, right? Things like that. What does your parish school do for Catholic Schools Week when it comes to liturgies? How do you think about prayer or liturgical prayer during that week to make maybe our celebrations that week even more special than they typically are?
Well, to launch off Catholic Schools Week, similarly to what you said, our parish tries to pull it into the weekend liturgies as well, Sunday as a launch, because our parishioners support our Catholic school. For so long, we were a stewardship parish. We are now tuition, but we offer a lot of tuition assistance. So this is a great way for our weekend parishioners to know and see the fruits of their gifts to the school. So to have students lead the liturgical ministries, help with the music ministry, read, bring up the gifts, which they're always welcome to do. I like to show it doesn't have to be just Catholic Schools Week where that happens, but that we draw attention to, hey, it's Catholic Schools Week, and here's what our school's been doing. Here's the talents of our school. Here's our students serving our church and parish at this time for the weekend. liturgies. It is a lot of times one mass. We have 5 masses on our weekend,
Mm,
and as much as I would love to say that it happens at all 5 masses, for us, it's typically just our most well attended mass, which is our Sunday 10 o'clock, or it's the one where more younger families gather. So that kind of inevitably becomes our school
mm,
mass. But we do try to make sure the theme is shared across all of the masses for the
yeah.
weekend with that to launch and kick off Catholic Schools Week.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. And I think, one of the things that I want to reiterate that you mentioned, as you described, that the students in your Catholic school are always welcomed to participate in various ministries that are accessible to them in your parish on the weekend. This is a great opportunity to be intentional about inviting students and their families, especially their alumni parents, whatever it is, to participate in those ministries on that Sunday, not just as a way to celebrate Catholic schools and highlight the vibrancy and the contribution of that school to your parish life, but this is also a great way to more intentionally bridge the gap between what happens in the school and what happens on the weekend in the parish to springboard then what happens after that week. What I mean by that is, so if you invite one of your fifth graders to read the first reading, proclaim the first reading at Mass on that Sunday, what are you going to do after that week to continue to have that student participate as a lector, or to have those families participate as greeters, or know that they're welcome to come to that Mass? This is a great opportunity to break that fourth wall a little bit, but also to recruit and to involve and to invite and to keep the momentum going once you've brought these two communities together in a more intentional way. So I encourage everyone to think about what that might look like, you know. Um, I also want to mention, again, I told you my students' experience, my children's experience in their school, that their school mass that week, families are invited, grandparents are invited, etc. As a pastoral consideration to all of our viewers, you might consider how can you help assist parents, brothers and sisters, grandparents who are coming to Catholic Schools Week Mass because of their children to more and best fully participate in that Mass? What I mean by that, and we mentioned this in several conversations before, is that we know that more and more of our students in Catholic schools, their families are not coming to Mass on the weekends. We're not participating in the life of the parish. So if I'm a parent who doesn't go to Mass, but my kids do when they go to Catholic school, is there a way to assist me with the spoken responses, right? Is there a way to help me participate more fully, and to not assume that I know what's happening, even though, of course, we wish everyone would and would be there at Mass? This is a great opportunity to be pastoral and not forget that some of the people who will be joining us, some of our guests, aren't really going to know what's happening. I don't know if you have any tips or how to do that, Holly, or what your community does when you anticipate that people might be at Mass who might not know how best to participate. What sort of pastoral strategies might be available to us?
I think depending on what resources you have in your parish, the way our church is set up, we are able to project things.
Mm,
So responses are often projected. With the side note, I like to make sure everything we project is not distracting. Like we take a lot of prayer and consideration into the aesthetic of the liturgical space. We're not using like videos or vibrant colors. It's as a way to have people's eyes up, facing the altar and participating, because we don't have an in-pew resource. If you have an in-pew resource, even something as simple as directing people to where the responses may be, as before you begin the liturgy. So you welcome people and maybe introduce your presider to participate fully in today's Mass. The responses can be found here, or if you have an insert. If you make worship aids, it is a great opportunity to maybe make that worship aid more extensive, as a catechetical tool as well. That includes the responses. So just directing people where they can go. And sometimes just that invitation to participate is what people need.
right.
This is a two-way street for me. I just confess, because I'm also not a fan of every mass you have the litany of 4 minutes of things that you say. So like finding that because then people quit listening if you do it all the time. It's like a sign that goes on the wall. If you leave a sign on the wall and it's there, people don't read it.
Right.
Um, eventually. So maybe how can you take this opportunity, or maybe it's somebody else who says something to introduce the liturgy, like as we celebrate Catholic Schools Week, here's what we do. We do have people who introduce the weekend masses. Like oftentimes the principal or assistant principal may come speak for like just a 30-second, hey, it's
Sure.
Catholic Schools Week. We appreciate you as our parish. Here's what our school's done or what we're doing this week to celebrate Catholic Schools Week. So just having that invitation often helps people. And you could also, even beforehand, like if the parents or families are sitting with their children, the teachers can also invite their children to invite their families to participate. Like if they're doing the responses,
Right.
so that the parents are seeing that. Sometimes I know the parents sit in other sections as
Oh, I
well,
see what
but
you mean. Yeah. Yeah.
if the parents are sitting with their kids, then they're actively seeing that and they
Right.
might have that encouragement as well. Those are just a couple
Well,
little
no,
suggestions.
I think that's great. And I would, I mean, everyone has their own process and things for a reason, but I, encourage you, if you're a school where for your school mass, even if parents are in attendance, you have your students sit, with their grade and sit. And I know everyone has their own procedures and safety protocols and everything else, so I'm not calling that into question, but I'd encourage you to think about what would it be like if you had your students sit with their families or special guests or whoever, and I would employ them to help, because I know sometimes both OCP, GIA, World Library, Lit Press, in all of our pew resources, if you have a missal or a hymnal, the order of mass is printed there, but you still have to know where to find it and how to use it and how to follow along. So I would deputize the students to help, because once they know the responses, but once they know and they're helping mom and dad or a guest, they are going to be on it, right? They're going to be on, and it's great formation. It's great catechesis. It's a great job to keep them engaged. So I would utilize them in that particular hospitality ministry. Might be helpful. Um, a couple of things that I want to point out. I'm going to share my screen one more time back to the page of our resource packet that has our calendar. I just want to point out again, here we are up here at the top, the Memorial of St. Elizabeth Ann Seton. Like I mentioned, we return to ordinary time next week. The primary liturgical color for ordinary time is green. So you'll notice we switch from the white here of the Christmas season after this weekend's solemnity of the Epiphany of the Lord to green for ordinary time. I want to point out a couple of things between now and Lent for you to consider, to think about how either with your school masses or your school prayer services, or even in your classroom or personal or staff prayer, you might incorporate them. We have a couple things coming up. The Day of Prayer for the Legal Protection of Unborn Children is January 22nd. This year it falls on a Monday. Might be a particular day. Oftentimes schools will either pray a rosary for life or have some sort of service project or some sort of way that they mark that celebration. The week beginning with the 15th, which in a civil calendar or civic calendar, excuse me, is Martin Luther King Jr. Day. It's also the feast for the Week of Christian Unity. So there's all kinds of opportunities there to pray for unity, to pray in common, to think about the hymns that we're singing, a lot of opportunities that are there and lots of resources available you can search for. The 21st of January is the Sunday of the Word of God. A lot of really great resources and exciting things that can be done that week to celebrate, especially Scripture and the role of Scripture in our faith and the way that we pray. So consider that week praying maybe with the readings from that previous Sunday. The Federation of Diocesan Liturgical Commissions, FDLC, they're linked in this packet, has a great resource they just put out last week with all kinds of tips and suggestions and activities and things to do for Sunday of the Word of God that you could easily do with children of any age that week, that third week in ordinary time to mark that. I also want to point out, again, Catholic Schools Week begins here. It's always the week beginning the last Sunday of January. So it runs from January 28th into the first few days of February. Note that the 25th of January is the Feast of the Conversion of St. Paul, and the 2nd of February is the Feast of the Presentation of the Lord. Oh, and next Monday is the Feast of the Baptism of the Lord. I point that out for a couple of reasons. Depending on when you have your school masses or class masses, if they don't fall on Monday or Wednesday or Friday, you might consider that week moving your Mass to one of those days to commemorate a feast. Again, feasts are major liturgical celebrations in the calendar of the church, universal. Every Catholic on the face of the planet, right? Every parish, every school is celebrating those feasts on those days. So consider moving your Mass there. If you can't move your Mass there, maybe have a prayer service or pray in a particular way to mark that celebration or that feast. Also, know that there are some things that we do a little differently when there is a feast. Holly, I don't want to put you on the spot here, right? But when we are looking at something like the Feast of the Presentation of the Lord on February 2nd, it's a Mass during the week on a weekday, Friday, but it's not a weekday Mass, it's a feast. So how are feasts, Masses on a feast, different than maybe your ordinary weekday Mass in terms of their nature or their structure or the way that we pray?
A lot of times a feast has a second reading. So after the psalm, there's another reading. Depending on the nature of the feast, there can be a Gloria that needs to be proclaimed. So like for the presentation, the Gloria would be proclaimed and the baptism of the Lord, 2 readings. Let's see what else. Sometimes the creed, but mostly the creed comes on solemnities, not just a feast. So a feast brings us up there. With that, let's see, what am I forgetting?
No, I think those are the primary ones. I mean, and again, just to encourage those of you watching, check the lectionary. And by the way, if you click, if you've downloaded this, if you click on, and I'm not going to do it now because it'll shift my screen share, but if you click on this, everything's hyperlinked to the USCCB's website, where you can get the lectionary readings for the Mass of the day for any day of the calendar year. So double check, because, as Holly mentioned, some feasts have 2 readings before the gospel, some do not. So you need to prepare for that if you have a student, and to find another student reader, or if you need to coordinate, if you're the music minister, to coordinate with whatever teacher is planning Mass that day to find another reader, whatever it might be. Also, again, for the Gloria, is the Gloria going to be spoken, hopefully sung, but to plan for that so that you've rehearsed it, so you have the right resources, the students are prepared, make sure that that's something that happens. Also, I pointed out these 3 feasts, baptism of the Lord, conversion of Paul, presentation of the Lord, that happen during ordinary time or before we get to Lent. If you look at Lent, keep in mind Ash Wednesday begins on Valentine's Day. So as a pastoral concern for you, my fellow teachers, you might want to think about how does your class celebrate Valentine's Day if you exchange, especially in an elementary school level, if you exchange cards or candy or whatever it is. Don't forget, it's Ash Wednesday. It's a day of fasting. Might not be the best day to give everybody all of those sweet tarts. But Ash Wednesday starts on the 14th of February. Notice that we have one feast, big feast, the Feast of the Chair of St. Peter on the 22nd. And on the 19th of March is the Solemnity of St. Joseph. So even though this is during Lent, Sundays of Lent, we don't sing the Gloria. But on the Feast of the Chair of St. Peter, on the Solemnity of St. Joseph especially, we do sing the Gloria. So it gets a little confusing, but note that solemnities, feasts, we do things a little bit differently, even if they fall during the season of Lent or Advent or some other season. The exception is during Lent, we don't sing or say Alleluia, and that still applies for a feast or solemnity. So even though the 19th of March is the Solemnity of St. Joseph, and we will sing the Gloria, and there will be a second reading, we do not sing or say the Alleluia on March 19th because it's the Solemnity of St. Joseph. Anything else, Holly, as you're looking at this calendar, just sort of caution, here are the exceptions, anything to keep in mind for these
I just want
feasts?
to point out, you say we don't sing the Alleluia, but we still have a gospel acclamation.
Yes, thank you.
So it's not like something just disappears. We just
Right.
replace the text with one of the approved gospel acclamation settings, which whatever mass setting you are using for your liturgies, there's almost always the equivalent
Right.
Lenten gospel acclamation for that. So that would be used on the solemnities or the feast days within Lent, but it could be the same one that you use for Ash Wednesday.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that clarification. Yes, of course, gospel acclamation, but not the Alleluia gospel acclamation. Um, the other thing I'll mention, and I say this out loud, sometimes, you say recommendations out loud and it sounds like you're giving it to other people, but really it's a reminder for yourself. As you go through Lent, if you're the one choosing music for school masses or a prayer service, or even if you're just looking at a recording or text that you want to pray with in your classroom, make sure you read through or listen through the lyrics for the entire hymn or psalm before you use it. I can't tell you how, for the longest time when I was working with the monastic community, it always happened, at midday prayer or vespers or something, we'd get to like the end of the fourth stanza and, you'd see it coming. All of a sudden, oh no, there's that Alleluia coming. Nobody knows what to do. So make sure you read through everything ahead of time, because sometimes there's an Alleluia hidden in a later verse that we don't anticipate. So I wanted to talk through again, not only just the fact that we have 3 distinct seasons here in about 6 weeks worth of time, to be aware of that, but also we have some not oddities, but some exceptions to the way that we're going to be looking at our seasonal structure with the feasts and the solemnities that show up. Since we were talking about some of these recommendations, I'm going to move. Sorry, I don't want to make you all motion sick here. I'm going to move to these pages, the seasonal bulletin, especially with Lent. These are some things to keep in mind, and we're not going to go through all of this information because you can go back and read this for yourselves, but things to keep in mind for the season of Lent and some of the things that are happening during Lent. So first of all, Lent begins on Ash Wednesday. You don't have the option to move Ash Wednesday, right? So if your school celebrates Mass on Tuesdays or Thursdays, sorry, move your Mass to Wednesday, because that's when Ash Wednesday falls. You can't anticipate it, right? Or observe it a different time. And we'll run all the way up to Holy Thursday, where Mass of the Lord's Supper and oftentimes Chrism Masses in many dioceses happen on March 28th of this year. So keep in mind, we mentioned this before, but I want to repeat it again. The Alleluia is not sung or recited from Ash Wednesday until the Easter Vigil, no matter the celebration that's happening, right? So put it away, read through your lyrics, right? The Glory to God is not sung or recited on Sundays or weekdays, except for solemnities, right? Evening Mass of the Lord's Supper, if you're somebody who's working in a parish, some feasts, etc., right? Note that we change the primary liturgical color to violet or purple. Right? Note that the decorations, the way we decorate both our liturgical spaces where we celebrate Eucharist, but also our prayer spaces. If you have a prayer corner in your classroom, or the way if you have a particular place outside of a chapel or in a chapel within your school, that decoration is going to change, right? Holly, do you other than your church sanctuary itself, right, where the environment is going to change to reflect the liturgical season, with the color, of violet or purple, with the change in decorations for season, how do the other spaces in your church or your school or your choir room, how do they change to reflect the reality of the Lenten season?
They become simplified. We try to, clean things up, put things away. Uh, if there's flowers decorating spaces, we do try to maybe move them out of the way just to notice a change. If there's colors on things and it's possible to change it to purple, we change it to violet purple as well.
Yeah. 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 I mean, I know some people change their bulletin boards, and people do exactly what you're talking about, removing additional decoration as opposed to necessarily changing additional decoration, something to consider. And of course, we not only do that because of the season that we're in and to mark and to observe the particular season we're in, but it also adds significant contrast then when we get to the Easter season and its joyful, festive nature when we pull out the stops, right? So you might consider the way that your classroom or school space or chapel space or church space within for your school community, what it looks like and how you will make it obvious that you were in the Lenten season and how that will contrast from the way that it will look once we're into the Easter season. Uh, Ash Wednesday, a couple of things to keep in mind for Ash Wednesday. Holly, in your parish, how does your parish handle distribution of ashes? How does that work both in maybe your Eucharistic liturgy, or do you do ash services or liturgy of the word at all?
Our distribution of ashes always falls within the Mass. So for us, the easiest thing that we do is that it's our Eucharistic ministers
Mhm.
that distribute the ashes. It would be the same people. If it does not have to be that way. I like to make that note. And the process for receiving ashes, it's the same communion line. So we make sure we have enough people
Mhm.
so that it would be the same process as people would go to receive Holy Communion in the church.
Yeah,
So logistically, we don't have to explain a whole lot. People just kind of know what to do
right.
with that. But if you are at a larger school where you could potentially use different teachers or different ministers, it's a great opportunity to not just have the same people do everything, because it doesn't have to be. There's no tying to it being communion ministers
Right.
distributing
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, that's a great recommendation. Again, you would want whoever is assisting with the distribution of ashes to be trained, but
Yes.
you don't have the same type of requirements as you would with an extraordinary minister of Holy Communion. So consider that with teachers or with older students or peer ministers or whoever other volunteers from the parish, whoever might be there, how you might commission people to serve as those assisting with the distribution of ashes so they know what to say, so they're formed for their ministry. This is also a great time, especially for younger students, but really students of all ages, to cue them before they receive ashes on Ash Wednesday, what this is, why we do it, maybe not to rub it off right away, whatever the case might be, so that they can anticipate that. I also want to mention, you know, for many Catholic schools, of course, have students who either maybe they're older students beyond the typical age for receiving sacraments in your diocese who have not received all of their sacraments of initiation, or students who aren't Catholic. There isn't a prohibition on non-Catholics receiving ashes on Ash Wednesday. So that's another thing for you to know, but also to cue other students or others, staff who might not be Catholic, to know that they can receive, they could distribute, but they can receive, so they're prepared to make that decision, especially if they're following the same procession for communion. And if your school is in the process of everyone goes to receive a blessing, they are able and encouraged and invited to receive ashes if they're comfortable with it. A couple of things, Holly, as you mentioned, again, sometimes for these feasts, other celebrations, there's a second reading. There is a second reading after the responsorial psalm on Ash Wednesday, so you're going to want to plan ahead for that in terms of finding another reader. There is no penitential act or penitential rite for Ash Wednesday, so no Confiteor, no Kyrie. So the blessing and distribution of ashes takes place right after the homily, right? So keep in mind all of these things happen there. And if you're a community that does do a blessing or distribution of ashes outside of Mass, at a special prayer services or liturgy of the word, keep in mind that while a lay person can distribute ashes, we can't bless the ashes. So the ashes still need to be blessed by your pastor or a deacon, especially if there's a different prayer service or opportunity later on. So you could have ashes that are blessed maybe at a different Mass or celebration that you use for your school or make available at some other point in time, and someone can distribute it, but they still need to be blessed by a deacon or a priest. Anything else for Ash Wednesday that you would make sure to elevate or emphasize, or something that I'm missing, Holly, that we want to encourage everyone to remember?
I don't think so. The only other thought I had to share is just looking at what music looks like during
Mhm.
Lent. And that Lent is a season where um, if you use a lot of instrumentation, you might consider, and it's very appropriate to simplify.
Mhm.
Uh, I know in our parish we have a diverse blend of styles of music. So sometimes we have drums, brass instruments, lots of things. And we don't actually allow any drums or
Mm.
brass instruments. Like we want it to feel more solemn. So that
Yeah.
doesn't mean you have to play the organ if it's not what your parish does. I mean, that would be great if it's possible to at least use it a little bit during the season. Um, that also doesn't mean all your music has to be sorrowful and lamentful.
Right.
Like we're still praising God during Lent, but maybe if there can be a noticeable change in the style
Yeah.
of music and Ash Wednesday in particular, like how can this feel very different from the week before?
Right.
And that
Right.
may even mean intentionally singing a couple extra Alleluias the week before.
Yeah.
What's one of your go-to songs that has a few extra Alleluias to get them out? Our students love Alleluia, Raise the Gospel. So like it's a must program somewhere right before Ash
Yeah.
Wednesday. And we point it out as we transition, like get those Alleluias in
Yeah.
um, so that
You
we
know,
can.
one of the things I love about Holy Week and Triduum, and we're not going to be talking about it much here, but on Holy Thursday, Mass of the Lord's Supper, there's a Gloria. And during the Gloria, the Roman Missal says that all of the church bells should be ringing, right? It should be excited and jubilant, and which would be a real contrast from the 40 days preceding it, right? We just sing the hell out of the Gloria and all the bells are ringing. Um, and then the bells fall silent until Easter in Easter Vigil, right? In our parish, we don't even ring the hours, but they do not ring, they do not toll, they fall silent until Easter and the resurrection. Um, Similar, it's not the same thing, right? But it's almost similar to, I know many school communities, parish communities will do exactly what you're talking about. You know, the music right before Ash Wednesday is maybe chosen with deference to songs that use a lot of Alleluia language. Sometimes they'll sing extra rounds of the gospel acclamation. There might be some sort of prayer or ritualizing of putting away the Alleluia at a school prayer service the day before, or we just really sing it with everything we got and then we put it away for 40 days so that when we take it back out again, right, it emphasizes that contrast like the bells on Triduum. So point being, well said, Holly, you know, thinking about how Ash Wednesday is going to be different, but also how that sets the tone then for the rest of the season with instrumentation and what we can mark ahead of time to emphasize that contrast is really helpful. I'm going to move up here to, you know, masses on a weekday during Lent. There's a couple of things here that I want to emphasize, but up here, I mentioned again on Ash Wednesday, there's no penitential, right? You know, no Kyrie or Confiteor, but during your other school masses, it might shift and emphasize that this is a mass during a different time. Maybe you use the Confiteor. I confess to Almighty God and to you, my brothers and sisters, right? Maybe you use that during the season of Lent because you didn't use it during ordinary time or one of the other options that's made available to you. Holly, what do you do with the Kyrie during the season of Lent?
So if you do use the Confiteor, the Kyrie must accompany it, either spoken or sung afterwards. Our practice is to sing it, and we sing the Kyrie in Greek, uh, its original language during the season of Lent. So it's a catechetical opportunity for our students to learn a new language, which
Yeah,
they love and are excited about.
yeah,
Um, and so it's important. I just always throw this in as a teacher as well, that be intentional about your changes and don't just do them.
yeah,
Like we have to catechize our students and our families, but like if you're going to change to the Confiteor with the Kyrie for Lent, don't just do it. You got to warn
right,
your students. You want them to
right,
participate, and then explain why it is that we're doing what we're doing.
yeah,
And they will appreciate it, understand it, and they will gobble it up.
yeah.
Our students love when you're like, this is a really old thing.
Hmm.
Um, all the, our founding fathers sang this,
Yeah,
and in the old cathedrals, and they sing it all over, and they rise to the challenge. So don't be scared if it's not in English,
Yeah.
but you
Yeah.
can do it. If you've never done it, maybe you introduce it your first year, and it can be spoken. That's the other thing I do want to just reiterate. So if the Confiteor is spoken, don't feel like if music isn't a strong, not every parish and school has a very strong music ministry. It can still be spoken and led by the priest afterwards.
Right. Right. Yeah, no, that's all well said. And also two other things that come to mind. So in addition to, what you're doing for this penitential rite, note that the things that we have available to us, right, in terms of choices and options, especially to mark the season, should we use something like the Confiteor or not? Will we sing or speak the Kyrie? Will it be in English? Will it be in Greek? What do we do about our Mass responses? What do we do about our Mass setting? Many parishes have the custom of changing the Mass setting with major liturgical seasons that change. I would encourage you for, penitential rite, for the Mass setting, how you do the Kyrie, what setting you use, where possible. This is just me. Do what you will. I think mirroring what your parish community, if there is a parish community attached to your school, is so helpful, especially to lower some of the barriers between, a student and what they experience in your school Mass. If they go to Mass on Sunday, that they can still participate fully, they understand it. It's not a completely different repertoire, right? So consider adopting what's there. I always choose for both school and parish the Mass acclamations, the chants from the Roman Missal. Some years we've done them in English. Oftentimes we'll do them in Latin, or some of them in Latin. When it comes to the memorial acclamation, where you have three options, oftentimes we'll use Save Us, Savior of the World. That's C, right? I always get my options mixed up. So you might choose that, right, which has a different penitent sort of nature to it. So again, there are a lot of not big impact, but maybe seemingly subtle options available to us to think through, to use starting Ash Wednesday, to catechize, like you were mentioning, Holly, to students, to align with your parish or the parish community that gathers there, that can really pack a pretty big punch. Anything about Mass settings? Because you use the Roman Missal chants, right, Holly, in your community?
We do, and part of our catechesis with using the Roman Missal chants is because they are the Roman Missal chants. They are quite simple. There's recordings of them. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Like, you can practice or send the recordings to teachers to play with their students. And it's just a great opportunity to remember that we are a universal church.
Yeah.
So when you face the arguments of why are we singing in Latin, we don't know what it means.
Yeah.
Well, we do. It's still, the Sanctus is still the holy in whatever language that we sing with that. And I always err on the side of, I love the Roman Missal chants during Lent. But if you are not a parish that chants regularly, I think it's important or worth sometimes noting that chant doesn't have to feel penitential.
Yeah.
As well. We're not chanting because we're lamenting and repenting for our sins. It's just a different style of praying and praising God with that. And don't feel like you have to. If that's not what your parish has done, focus on other things to make Lent feel different this year, and really make sure that you're intentional with whatever plan you're going into for the season.
Yeah, no, that's well said. Not as an aside, I always, for myself, and I would use this with my students, one of the things I just love about our church and about our faith is the communion of saints, both capital S and lowercase s. And I love the fact that there are hymns and chants and texts and other things that I pray day in, day out, at different times of the liturgical year, that I know my great-grandparents would have prayed in the same parish. They were members of the same parish where I grew up in, or my 10 times great-grandparents, or whoever it might be, that there's that common sort of repertoire. And I love that. I also feel like, from the education catechesis side of things, there are some, core elements of sort of the Catholic liturgical curriculum that are helpful to instill. And it doesn't mean that I have to like them. There are some hymns or some texts or some chants that aren't particularly my aesthetic. However, it's one of those things where I feel like my students should know how to sing blank or should know how to say blank. So consider that and what's available to us during Lent too. We are celebrating Lent this year beginning on February 14th, and next year we're going to celebrate Lent again, and the year after, and the year after, and the year after. So what are the tools, the texts, the all of those things we can put in our Lenten toolbox, right? That curriculum we can instill within our own Catholic liturgical culture, that then our students can keep adding to and drawing upon year after year, generation after generation. That's an awesome responsibility and opportunity for us too. This Lent is not the only Lent. Therefore, you're not going to screw it up. Try. You're not going to don't try to screw it up. Try to not screw it up is what I'm saying. But also, you're not going to screw it up. We're going to pray Lent again. We're going to observe Lent again next year, right? So that takes some of the pressure off, but also set the context for what it is we're teaching our students. Another, sort of unique thing about liturgical calendar, different seasons of the year, different types of feasts, different commemorations take precedent over others. So there's a note here in your packet that Lenten weekdays, Lent is so important that Lenten weekdays take precedence over other celebrations that might happen on that calendar date, other than feasts and solemnities. So because the beginning of Lent moves around, you might notice that Ash Wednesday is not always the same day. Easter is not always the same day. So there are some dates that fall during Lent that sometimes are not Lenten, or sometimes don't fall during the season of Lent. So if I go back up to this calendar, sorry. And I have the note in here, if you are a teacher or a music minister at the parish or school of St. Polycarp, your patronal feast, the memorial of St. Polycarp, is the 23rd of February. But because it is a Lenten weekday, the Lenten weekday takes precedent over that. Now, if you're in a parish where that's really your patron, there are some other things you can do and things to observe that particular date. You'll want to talk to your liturgist or your pastor or your diocesan office, whatever it might be. But note that if you're someone who really looks at the liturgical calendar or celebrates saint days, or you're looking at an old ordo or something like that, notice that on this calendar I gave you, optional memorials, obligatory memorials don't show up, because for most of us, the Lenten weekday takes precedent. If there's something unique to you in your community, you're going to want to talk to your pastor or liturgist or somebody ahead of time to know how you're going to handle it, if that makes sense. Right? Okay, all that being said, we've got about 11 minutes left, Holly, and I'm going to go back up to the top here. We have this list of preparation considerations for you, whether you're watching this live or you're watching this recording, things to keep in mind. So maybe, Holly, we can go through some of these and emphasize some of the points that we brought up already, and maybe hit on some things that we haven't talked about yet right now. So as you're beginning to prepare for this entire quarter, but especially during Lent, but any of your school masses this quarter or others, the Ordo is your best friend, right? The documents, you're not quite sure what to do. Do we use a Gloria? Do we not? What's the order of things? The general instruction for the Roman Missal, which is available for free online. It's in the front part of the Missal in your chapel or in your parish. Gives you all of the answers, right, for your weekday masses. So check it out. Check out the Ordo. That's the official calendar. It'll tell you what color, what readings, do you use a Gloria or not? All of that stuff is in your Ordo. So know that there are answers to these questions. Find it, use it. It's going to be great. What do you have a particular Ordo that you use, Holly, or a particular resource where you go for those answers to those questions?
We have the Ordo that's printed for our archdiocese.
Yeah. So that's a great point. Check out your diocese, your archdiocese, or your region of diocese. Your Episcopal region might have a Ordo unique to you that's going to have lots of information. It'll also give you as I was mentioning before, sometimes Lenten weekdays take precedence unless it's a major feast for you. If your diocesan patron is St. Polycarp, that's going to be a feast for you, right? So it'll say that in your diocesan ordo. So check it out.
And the USCCB Ordo is very accessible for just in the United States.
Yeah. Yeah. If you go to the
And
USCCB website, you can download the liturgical calendar for the year. It's going to give you most of the information you're going to need to know, if not all of it. We talked about this already, planning with a seasonal mindset. Again, how will we approach this? How will Lent feel like a whole season celebration? What are the things we can do consistently throughout so it doesn't feel like 40 separate days or 40 days with different rules or approaches? But how can we think about planning a whole season? At Margaret Mary, Holly, do you have like a theme or an emphasis or something that ties the whole season together for you when you approach planning?
I mean, usually it depends what cycle we're in with the
Yeah,
year and the weekend readings. So we're in cycle B,
yeah.
which makes for a unique year. I'm trying to think because I'm a planner for those who are new to me. I've had to have Lent done before Advent. I had to have that done. Um, with that for me to survive. So love and mercy is definitely a big theme for our parish this year. Like our music really high. I mean, and that's a general theme for Lent.
Right,
But when we're looking at the text of songs that we are repeating throughout the season,
sure.
we're not going to sing what's 40 different songs for Lent. If we
Right.
use like four songs in a mass for 5 weeks, we're not
Yeah,
going to sing 40 different songs. What is our little toolbox of songs that we're going to have
yeah,
for this season? And love and
yeah,
mercy are a big theme for us this year.
yeah. Yeah, and I mean, so a theme might be it. And again, and I'm going to jump ahead. Don't miss the opportunity for liturgical informational catechesis, number 8. So if you pick a theme or there's some sort of emphasis, make sure everyone knows it, right? Don't just hope they figure it out at the end of it. So message it. So a theme might be it. Again, the common ways, maybe you have a seasonal way that you gather. Maybe your school masses or prayer service begin the same way. Maybe you have a common preparation song. Maybe you have a common communion song. Maybe you have a common gathering song. And maybe it's not that you sing just the same verses. Maybe you sing, I think of there was one year with Bernadette Farrell's "Oh God, You Search Me," which is a modified version of the text to Psalm 139. And each of the stanzas, the way Bernadette broke up the psalm text and paraphrase, lined up with the gospel readings for the 5 Sundays of Lent. So we would begin with verse 1, Sunday 1, verse 2, Sunday 2, and it lined up well. But we had a common way of gathering. Maybe you do that for your school masses. Maybe you choose a common psalm for the season instead of whatever the psalm might be. However you think about it, think about that seasonal mindset. So each time you pray and celebrate, you're contributing to this overall season as opposed to feeling like you're reinventing the wheel every time. I can't emphasize this enough, that if you have different individuals responsible for liturgical or catechetical ministries in your parish, or faith formation, if you have a campus minister, if you're in a middle school, high school setting, whatever that might be, make sure you're coordinating, right? If you're the music director and the individual teachers in your parish school are making some of the smaller level decisions to plan mass because their class is in charge, make sure you're coordinating plans so this is all feeling like a piece of a whole, so that the way the parish, the way faith formation, the way the school, the way the different groups, whatever within your parish are observing Lent, don't feel different or at worst at odds with one another, so that there's some sort of way that you can connect. Less is more. Repetition is good. Silence is great. How do you incorporate additional periods of silence during Lent at all? Is that a way that you add to the feeling of the season, Holly?
We try to, if I can get our priest to be patient after communion.
That's a different webinar. That's a
So
different
like, and then
conversation.
I say communion because sometimes that's like the easiest place to start. Like if you regularly have music all the way to the end, or like little instrumental music as people are, as the purification of vessels happens. Like stopping the music just a little bit
Yeah,
sooner is an easy way. Talking to your priest and asking him to breathe and silently pray a glory be for an extra
yeah,
moment before getting up for the gospel acclamation
right.
or before the prayer of the faithful. Sometimes it does take the coordination of working
Yeah,
with your pastor,
yeah,
because other times, silence is scary, and it's like, okay, we just move on to the next thing. So
right.
I think incorporating silence really has to be a team effort,
Yeah,
between who's ever the musician, the pastor, and then if you're like the liturgical person or leading the mass, it's not
yeah,
just a one person in charge of the silence, wherever it is. And that doesn't mean you have to add silence everywhere. Like I said, it
right.
can just be one or two places, but those moments, will be felt.
Yeah, yeah, no, I love that. And to emphasize again, coordination and planning and conversation ahead of time is super important. And then to go back, right, we keep hitting on this. Make sure everyone, folks in the pews, your student staff, everyone understands why you're doing what you do. It always happens Ash Wednesday or the first Sunday of Lent when there's a prolonged period of silence after communion and the pastor is sitting or presider is sitting, whatever it might be, and people start looking around because they wonder who forgot what's supposed to happen next, what isn't happening that's supposed to be happening, which is powerful, right? It shows how taking that extra pause can be disruptive in a positive way, but people should know why you're doing what you're doing so they get the most out of it. That being said, and Holly, feel free to disagree with me, this because this might be just a me thing. I've been a part of parishes that sometimes will add more silence by not singing or using a song or hymn during preparation. I'm not a big fan of that only because especially with students, I know that the texts that we sing can be homiletic in and of themselves. They're formative, the types of texts we sing. And so I hesitate to remove an opportunity to sing texts together that form us. Same with I've been a part I've worked with some pastors who really want the dismissal to be in silence. No hymn at the end of Mass. And that might be okay. Maybe instead you sing a song of thanksgiving at the end of communion and then you depart in silence. But again, I hesitate to miss the opportunity to form us, especially when we're being sent out to go do. Um, but oh, and the other thing is, I've also been a part of communities where they add silence before the communion song or communion chant. And I also that's not my particular preference, especially with the directive that the communion song begins as soon as the priest receives, because it's one whole like it doesn't fit to me and it's disruptive. But silence after communion or after the everyone's done receiving while the Blessed Sacrament is being reposed and the vessels are being purified, brilliant. Maybe before Mass, maybe no prelude, whatever that might be. But make sure people know, but be thoughtful. Don't just put silence anywhere. Be thoughtful about how it's going to contribute. I don't know if what I mentioned, if you agree with it, or again, feel free to disagree, Holly, if I mentioned something that's
No,
blasphemy.
I do agree with you on that. We don't omit the preparation of gifts song. But if you choose to, it's another catechetical opportunity,
Mhm.
because when you go to daily mass and there isn't music, the assembly has a role and a response to say there. So
Yes,
that
yes,
can
yes, yes.
actually create an opportunity, again, for catechesis or for understanding what's happening during the mass in that
Yeah,
moment when we respond, "Blessed be God forever."
yeah,
That can be very powerful. But again, it has to be intentional
yeah,
and, for a reason. Don't just do it to do it and to check the
right,
boxes.
right. I love that. I know we're getting close on time, but I want to mention a couple of other real quick things. Incorporating senses. It might be visual, right? Oftentimes the way that we decorate for Lent, I don't know, burlap seems to be the fabric of choice for Lent, right? Which but I mean it looks rough. I mean, it looks different than our other fabrics and things. So it might be visual, but also incorporate sentences, the way we sing about senses, the way we talk about senses, let alone what we see, what we smell, what we touch, what we hear, what we taste. Think about too, again, I would strongly encourage you, if your school does not have a sacrament of penance or a penance prayer service during the season of Lent, have one. How could you celebrate Stations of the Cross in a particular way? How could you do a Lenten prayer service? It doesn't have to be Mass that you add, but maybe there's another way you add some sort of communal prayer. Again, don't miss the opportunity for catechesis. Tell people what you're doing and why, right? You put all that thought and emphasis into it to land. Make sure you don't leave to chance their understanding. And then the last two things I want to put here, how can these plans, how can what we're doing, this theme, our approach, how can you help families bring that into their observance of Lent? Maybe you send home with your students or in a newsletter a particular meal blessing, to cue families, hey, pray together if you're not. But maybe there's a way that you can bring that meal blessing home, or some sort of way to decorate a prayer corner or some sort of resource there. If you're praying with a hymn that's going to be, or a song that's going to be your common gathering song for the season, print out the text on a card and bring it home and have them pray it together as a way to extend it. Or how can you bring ritual into the classroom? There are all kinds of great resources that are out there. All of the publishers, the catechetical publishers, have things. Check it out. Think about it now. Talk to your DRE. Talk to your faith formation coordinators. There are really wonderful ways that you can bridge Mass and classroom and home throughout the season of Lent. That being said, we are out of time. Holly, any last words, things we didn't get to that you want to make sure to say, things that you want to emphasize as folks are going to go off and start to think about the next couple of months in their school liturgies?
No, just pray about it. It's not too early to start thinking about Lent. Have the conversations with the people who need to, which is usually the pastor, as well. And I think that's my biggest advice is don't plan on changing something for Lent without talking to your pastor, because he definitely has to be on board. And if you're in doubt, ask for help. Matt in OCP has great resources, willing to answer, and you don't have to change everything at once.
Yes.
Like Matt said, Lent will happen for as long as we are celebrating our earthly lives here. So one small change can make a big difference. If you try to change the whole Mass for the first time and it hasn't happened in your parish in years or ever, you might have a martyr complex, but that's not
that is not the way to celebrate Lent. That is not the theme we're looking at, right?
No.
The thing I will add, emphasize exactly that Ash Wednesday is 6 weeks from yesterday. That I don't say that to stress you out, but I say that to say all of the other people you have to talk to communicate with, do it early. Your pastor is human. If you come up with all of these questions and all these decisions the day before Ash Wednesday on February 13th, understandably, he might not have all the patience or creativity in the world for you, right? So help him out, help everybody else out, have conversations early, and it's going to be great. And like Holly said, don't feel bashful about reaching out. And the last thing, like I like to end all of our webinars, is with a word of thanks. Holly, thank you for being here, for pulling double duty this week. Know that we'll continue to pray for you and everyone who's at Seek, that your last day and a half are fruitful. Please keep praying for all of us. And thank you to all of you who are joining us live, all of you who are watching this afterwards, for everything you do for your students, for your liturgies, all the care and energy and emotion and blood, sweat, and tears you put into this. It matters. It makes a difference. What you're doing is saving the world. And however we can help you, let us know, but know that what you're doing matters. We see you, we're grateful for you, and we hope that we'll see you on another Center for Learning webinar sometime soon. Thanks, Holly. Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful Lent, and we'll see you on a webinar hopefully sometime soon when we look at fourth quarter, Easter, First Communion, graduation, all of those celebrations. So keep an eye out for that soon. Talk to you later all. God bless. Bye-bye.